Joining us now, two writers with strong thoughts about Bernie Sanders' candidacy. Author, Time Magazine editor-at-large and NBC News political analyst Anand Giridharadas, and writer for New York Magazine, Jonathan Chait. Jason Johnson and Susan Del Percio all back with us as well, along with Joe, Willie, and me.
Well, this is, I will tell you, this is kind of like Crossfire. We could, with Anand and Jonathan, with such differing opinions. Jonathan, let's start with you. I was surprised by how strongly you came out talking about Bernie Sanders' campaign and what it would mean to the Democratic Party. Talk about why you believe nominating Sanders to run against Trump would be a, quote, act of insanity.
Sure. You want to be clear, you can't use a word like unelectable because anybody has a chance. But I think it's pretty obvious that Sanders has a much worse chance than anybody else. And we know certain things about elections. One of them is saying lots of really unpopular things makes you less likely to win elections. And Bernie Sanders has said lots and lots of unpopular things. His specific positions have... like taking away people's private health insurance. When you go from the generic Medicare for all to we're taking away your private insurance, it goes from, you know, a 50-50, 40-60 to something like a 30-70 election. Abolishing ICE, giving health care coverage to undocumented immigrants, all very unpopular. And he packages those unpopular positions with an unpopular label of democratic socialist. You know, polls are from anywhere from 20 to 40% at best agree with socialism and think capitalism is bad. So that's a really, really dangerous combination. And furthermore, I think it just plays directly into President Trump's strength, which is that people are pretty satisfied with the economy. So he's just going to be able to say, this guy's going to upset the apple cart. And rather than focusing on Trump's vulnerabilities, you're just going to go right at his one area of strength. So I'm not saying he can't win, because you never know who can and can't win, but I'm saying if you're playing the odds, his odds are pretty bad.
And Jonathan, you also talked about his background. It looked like it was actually, it could have been written in Breitbart, except it wasn't. You wrote it, and you talked about his past and the fact that, you know, him with Soviet leaders, him leading far-left movements in the past, some of the other things that he did that the Trump people will just go to town on. It reminds me of what Bob Kerrey said incorrectly in the end of Bill Clinton. It looks like enough stuff so they could open him up like a rusty can.
Well, that's right. It's a little bit Jeremy Corbyn-like, where he has some real associations with alternate, you know, left-wing politics that had a lot of connections with the far left world internationally. And I think some of that is on video, some of that's on quotes. I think is also going to just make it easier for a Trump campaign to say this isn't just progressivism, this isn't Roosevelt, that it's something radical and dangerous and that you should be scared of. Now, I don't think people should be scared of it. I don't think he's actually going to be able to do the things he says he wants to do if he's elected, but I think he's making the task very, very easy, and I think Democrats are really very right to be afraid of nominating him.
So, Anand, curious as to what you think about everything that Jonathan has laid out in his column, but also the larger question that perhaps Democrats should be asking themselves instead, which is, why is Bernie Sanders doing so well in this moment?
It's a very good question. You know, 19 years ago, little known fact, I, as an intern, fact-checked some of Jonathan Chait's pieces of the New Republic. I'm not sure I can help him now with this argument, because I don't think it is our job as journalists to predict, right? And I think one of the points that was made when Jonathan wrote his piece, which was thoughtful and a coherent argument, but I think inherently getting into this terrain of predicting. And John predicted the Iraq War would go well. John predicted that Trump would lose decisively to Hillary Clinton and suggested that the Democrats cheer his nomination by the Republican Party. I think we should be humble when we have those kinds of records. I don't predict for a living. I report. I'm a reporter. So what I did was travel several thousand miles around the country, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Nevada, all kinds of places, and actually talk to the people in this movement that I am somewhat puzzled by as well, or was puzzled by before I did that work. It is completely puzzling that someone with Bernie Sanders' views is doing as well as he is in this country. And as you say, the interesting question is not to take our reflexes and tamp down something new that is happening, but to say, if this thing that is happening, that by a certain kind of logic shouldn't be happening, is happening, what's going on? And what I found in all of these places, most of that travel was in the Rust Belt. There were a bunch of guys there in particular who caught my eye, guys who look like Trump voters if you're making a police sketch of the composite Trump voter. Beefy guys, sometimes wearing camo. There's actually one guy I saw who had blood, like he had just come from shooting a deer, like there was blood on the camo pants. And they're at these rallies. And I asked them, what do you think about Bernie Sanders? Democratic socialist, you have a problem with that? And these guys were all like, oh yeah, I'm not for democratic socialism. I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist. But why are you at this rally? Oh, I love Bernie. He's fighting for me. All I would say, with all humility as a reporter, there is something going on in this country that is outside a lot of conventional thinking right now. There are a lot of people who actually are living in the 21st century and don't care as much about 20th century divides and labels as people think. And it's actually the right thing to do in this moment as a reporter, at least for me, is to become curious about that and try to understand. And what I've understood is when you have facts like over the last 30 years, the top 1% of Americans have gained $21 trillion in wealth, while the bottom 50 have lost $900 billion in wealth. That's the kind of fact we start to understand. Maybe politics are changing and are going in a place that we don't quite fully understand.
Jonathan Chait, we'll let you respond. There's a lot of interesting polling around what Anand just said, which is that the divide in this country isn't really Democrat and Republican. It's younger voters who view sort of anti-elitism, anti-establishmentism as their calling. That could mean Donald Trump. It could mean Bernie Sanders.
Right. It's interesting to me that people made the exact same argument that you just heard on behalf of Jeremy Corbyn. We can't trust the numbers. We can't trust the polls because there's something happening here. I met these passionate Corbyn voters. It's not going to be reflected in the polls. And in fact, many people on the left connected the presumed success that Corbyn was going to have in Britain to the success that they presumed Sanders was going to have because they saw it on the ground. And so we should ignore all these wildly unpopular positions that they had because there was just this feeling. You can't know. We should be humble about our certainty, but that doesn't mean we know nothing. That doesn't mean we should ignore all the evidence and all the data, and that tells you that politicians who have lots of extremely unpopular positions are less likely to win. That's just, I don't think anything he sees on the ground can make you ignore that fact.
Jason, why don't you jump in and give us your thoughts? Is Sanders the Democratic savior, or would Democrats be insane to nominate him?
They would not be insane to nominate him if he's the person that the majority of people want. And I have to push back against this. As a political scientist, in addition to somebody who happens to work as a journalist, I'm not a reporter. This comparison to Jeremy Corbyn doesn't make sense. It is a very narrow-cast understanding of not only British politics, but American politics. I have said all along, Bernie Sanders' path to success is much more like Lopez Obrador in Mexico. The two major parties have disappointed everybody. People are angry that the Democrats no longer really represent working-class people. People are mad that Republicans aren't necessarily doing anything good for the economy. And then you can have someone step into that gap and end up getting elected after several times of sort of being taken advantage of by the system. That's what happened at our neighbors in Mexico. That would be the path of victory for Bernie Sanders. It is crazy to say that he has no chance of winning. I think he's a high-risk, high-reward kind of candidate.
I think what is so interesting in this conversation
let me just say, Anna, let me just ask you this about Bernie. Again, this is a guy who, again, he does have pretty radical views regarding economics. If you look at the mainstream of American political thought over the past 100 years, we have unemployment at 50-year lows. The United States economy has been doing very well during the 11-year Obama recovery. Bernie Sanders, he may have made much more sense in 2010, 2012 than he's making in 2020 when the economy is again still enjoying 11 years of recovery that started under Barack Obama.
I think the reason that is less significant to me is that the deeper fundamentals of the economy, when you look at deeper indicators, longer-term indicators like labor force participation rate, right? What percentage of men are just kind of fundamentally out of the game of working permanently? That's a very disturbing number, and it has been disturbing for some years. If you look at things like, can young people do the things that mark getting older, the way earlier generations did? Buy a home, get married, afford to have children? No, much lower rates. Business formation. The economy's fine in certain macro indicators, but small business formation by my generation, the millennial, I'm a very old, white-haired millennial, is down, drastically down. So a lot of people are watching TV and hearing policy positions, but they're also looking at their own lives, in my experience, and they're assessing the fact that whoever is talking about tweaks to the system is probably not going to change the fact that they can't buy that house, that they can't afford to start that business, that they are terrified, as I have been terrified at certain moments, about not having health care for their child. Right. And I think we're seeing something new because people are tired of the old, same old of their stuck lives.
But Jonathan, you look at the numbers, you look at the data, we're talking about whether Bernie Sanders is going to be lined up ideologically with most Americans in the general election. Right. I'm not so sure he is. Even in the primary, when one poll after another has shown over 50% of Democrats have wanted a more moderate candidate throughout this entire process. And add up the numbers in Iowa, it still seems to be that way.
That's right. He's consolidated the left wing of the party, and the center left wing of the party is still splintered and might be splintered for several more races, which is a really disturbing prospect. And again, Sanders, I never said is as left as Corbyn. He's not as far left as Corbyn. I'm saying the kinds of arguments you're just hearing on behalf of Sanders are the exact same arguments that were made on behalf of Corbyn. Let's ignore his unpopular positions because I feel something happening out there. I think you should look at what people tell you about his positions, and that data is disturbing. It doesn't mean he can't win. It means you should be really worried about the bet.
All right, Anand, as we close out, we wanted to show what you tweeted yesterday about Mitt Romney's vote to convict. Quote, there aren't a lot of moments of pure patriotism and self-sacrifice in American life anymore, of bravery in the face of what will be a remainder of a life filled with threats and disparagement. Let us honor one when we see it. Bravo and thank you, Mitt Romney. Anand Giridharadas and Jonathan Chait, thank you both for being on this morning.
Thanks, guys.
And ahead this morning,